So thank you for the opportunity to spend a fresh evening, air-conditioned, with you here.
This morning it wasn't.
And indeed I will speak on the church and the 4 words that are given to me by the Bishops' Conference: a listening church, a welcoming church, an accompanying church, and a church that goes forth. Coming from these words, the narrative of the disciples of Emmaus. And to start with, I give on your sheet a reference to the last document of the Pope, Pope Francis, the document he wrote after the Synod on youth and youth ministry. And there is a phrase there in which he says, youth ministry, when it ceases to be elitist and is willing to be popular, is a process that is gradual, respectful, patient, hopeful, tireless, and compassionate. The Synod proposed the example of the disciples of Emmaus as a model of what happens in youth ministry. Now, I think that the model here of Emmaus is not only for youth ministry, but for all ministry. There is no other way of dealing with adult people than the way you deal with young people. And there is no other way for dealing with young people as the best way for dealing with adult faithful today. And let me start immediately with the first, a listening church. For a church, there can be no teaching without listening first. And all of us who are a priest or a bishop, I think that we were more prepared for teaching than for listening. There is an art of listening to be learned by all of us who are in pastoral ministry. And over the years, we have to learn the art of listening better and better. And here also I would like to refer to a text of Pope Francis in his first main document, Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel. And there he has a paragraph on the art of listening. I quote him: "We need to practice the art of listening, which is more than simply hearing. Listening in communication is an openness of heart. Listening is an openness of heart. It's not only an openness of the ears. Listening starts here. Listening starts as an opening of the heart, which makes possible that closeness without which genuine spiritual encounter cannot occur." So listening is an encounter, a genuine spiritual encounter. Listening helps us to find the right gesture and word, which shows that we are more than simply bystanders. So it's more than being there, more than being a simple bystander, like a journalist who sees something happen and writes an article. No, it's more than that. Only through such respectful and compassionate listening, a listening that is respectful and compassionate, can we enter on the paths of true growth and awaken a yearning for the Christian ideal, the desire to respond fully to God's love and bring to fruition what He has sown in our lives. So a listening that makes the seeds that God has left there grow and flourish. Now, let me refer to 4 kinds of persons I, as a bishop, I had to learn listening to. Yeah. First, families. Families challenge me to listen to them and to listen carefully. In my first years as a bishop, about 10, 11 years ago, on gatherings or receptions like this, only women, only mothers and grandmothers came spontaneously to tell me stories or particularities about their family, their children, of grandchildren. As I said yesterday, in these first years, if you wanted to see or to find the bishop in an assembly, you had to look where the women were standing. They were speaking with him. Now, after I published an open letter in preparation of the Synod of Bishops on marriage and family life in 2015 and 16, in which I touched different family issues of our culture in Central Europe, a new range of people came to tell me their stories. The men came forward. Fathers and grandfathers, divorced and remarried people, single mothers or fathers, persons living in a gay or lesbian relation. I got to know in a short time a much larger and complex human reality than I knew before, that I knew from books or articles or only from hearing from others. And more than that, I got to know plenty of caring and committed persons, caring and committed Catholics, many of them still connected to a parish or a Catholic movement, or working in catechetical and liturgical services. They made their bishop discover an unknown part of his flock and their personal lives. Now, how can I be a good shepherd without knowing and appreciating all of my flock? In brief, so many families are waiting for the church and its ministers to listen to them more carefully. Listening to families. And all families that are a bit numerous, parents that had 2 or 3 or 4 children, and grandchildren, they have all possible combinations within their own family. And they have so many different stories to tell. A first group for listening to. Second, victims of sexual abuse or harassment by clergy challenged me to listen to them. In Belgium, in spring 2010, that is 10 years ago, in only a couple of months' time, about first 300, 400, then 500 victims made themselves known in Belgium and introduced a complaint. It was like a volcanic eruption. Nobody of us was prepared to such a worst-case scenario. In the months and years that followed, I received a large number of victims and tried to listen to them as understanding as possible. After 20, 30, sometimes more than 50 years, men older than 80 years came forward of suffering. There was few more I could do for them but listening. These meetings and conversations learned me a lot. I was not trained for that kind of listening. I was trained for a normal conversation with parents asking their child to be baptized, or a young couple to be married, or hearing confession, as short as possible. But that kind of listening I was not trained for. These conversations changed my ministry as a bishop. First, in 2 senses. First, of course, they learned me much on the humiliation and suffering victims of sexual abuse had to undergo, and on the many consequences these criminal offenses had on their personal and professional and social lives. But secondly, these victims, they learned me a lot on the weaknesses and the shadow sides of my own church and her ministers, from top to bottom. I learned a lot that I did not know before on the church and her ministers. It made me see and realize the danger of clericalism, the emptiness of some ecclesial speech, the terrible consequences of too easy silence and formal obedience. Listening is healing. It is healing not only for the victims, but it is also healing for the church and her ministers. Yeah. as Pope Francis said also on different occasions. Oh, another group of listening I had to learn. Then a third group of persons testing my listening capacities as a bishop are my co-workers, priests, permanent deacons, and many lay pastoral workers, men and mostly women. What I mean here is not a kind of listening practiced in many pastoral consultations or organizational meetings. We have lots of meetings, just as you have. There is no shortage in my diocese and in our organization of all kinds of assemblies and gatherings. On the contrary, the listening I intend here is another one. Many co-workers nowadays suffer from the present situation of the Church and the poor results of their hard working. As happens in most dioceses in Western Europe, I have to entrust more and more parishes to an ever and ever more pastoral unities, to a continually diminishing number of pastoral co-workers. Situation is different in our part compared to Malta. You still have quite big numbers here of priests. In our area there was an abundance of priests. Now it's minimal, just a little bit above zero. And we have more and more parishes and unities to give to the never diminishing number of priests, deacons and lay people. Many of them, particularly among the younger co-workers, suffer under this situation. A young priest from India who is working in my diocese said to me, "As it is written in the Gospel of St. John, I increasingly feel myself among my people not as a shepherd, but as a mercenary hired in to watch over them. I do not feel as a shepherd among his flock anymore. I feel like an organizer, like an ecclesial governor. I have to look after many communities, but I do not feel in these communities that there is my flock, my family." That phrase struck me, and the priest is right. He has to travel from one community to another in order to ensure some essential liturgical services, sacraments, and pastoral meetings. He meets a lot of people, including a number of faithful and committed persons, but he nowhere really feels at home. His ministry makes him feel more like the overseer of an organization than the shepherd, the father of a family. Such feelings have a deep effect on our co-workers. Now, what does it mean for the Church to carefully listen to its own co-workers? That is also a question. And the last group I would like to mention here is a particular group. The fourth group I should learn to listen to are all the voices I do not hear or I cannot understand. In the gospel narrative of the disciples of Emmaus, there is something strange. Jesus understood, the risen Lord understood what the disciples of Emmaus were talking about without hearing their voices. They were speaking with one another, and he followed a couple of meters behind. Like in a shopping street, you see a lot of people walking before you, talking with one another. You see their body language, and you can see if they feel happy or if they feel depressed. That you can see, but you do not know what they are speaking about. Now, however, Jesus understood the disciples of Emmaus without hearing their voices. As a bishop, I would be pleased with such a divine gift, to understand and to know what people are speaking about, those that I do not hear, because those are the most important part of my flock. I know people discuss at home, at work, among friends and relatives. They do discuss issues related to God and the Church, to life and the meaning of life, to what is good and what is bad, to marriage and family life, and to so many other issues that are relevant for the life and mission of the Church. I know they commend the teaching and the behaving of the Church, the person and the example of Pope Francis, the strengths and the weaknesses of Christianity, but I don't hear their voices. In the last nuncio, we have Italian nuncios, like you have maybe in Brussels. No, the last one, a good Italian nuncio, one day he said to me, relating to a diocese, there was a problem. And he said to me, oh, I think everything is okay there now, because I don't hear them anymore. Oh, I said, my dear Excellency, you are Italian. In Italy, when people feel sad or bad, you will hear it. Here it is the opposite. If they feel sad or bad or unlucky, you won't hear it. So as a nuncio, you will have to learn here to listen, not to those you hear as an Italian, but to those you do not hear. That is the voices you will have to listen to if you would like to understand this. No, something, the voices I do not hear. What is more, in social and public life in my country, particularly in the media, there is something like an official code or a silent agreement not to speak openly about God or religion. If it is not in a negative way, you can say, I do not go to church anymore. That's a very popular. But say that you do go, no. It's like saying for which political party you have voted last time, don't say it. Or saying how many money there is on your bank account. Don't say it to the others. So God, He is there. Don't say it. Well, the Second Vatican Council asked the Church to carefully listen to the signs of the times, but how to listen and to understand the many silent voices, the silent voices that crisscross our society. These are little 4 points I would like to mention in a listening church. Now I come to a second point, a welcoming church. A welcoming church, and the term is coming also from Pope Francis. Becoming a welcoming church requires much more than opening the doors for allowing more people to come in. You can open the doors, but nobody will come in. The doors of the church, they are open, but it is not because the doors are open that people come in. You have to reach out. It is first of all a matter of reaching out to people to find them where they are and to walk together with them. I jump a bit. In our countries we have, and welcoming is not an easy thing. That is what I would like to say here. It is not an easy thing. Church attendance, church practice in Central Europe, from where I come, is very, very low. I read, and they confirmed me, I read on internet that about 35% of the Catholics is attending Eucharist during the weekend. Be happy. In my country it is maybe 3%. It's very small, so in big parishes only 30, 50 people will attend Sunday Mass. So the degree of, active, committed living with the church is extremely low. So how to be a welcoming church? We say that we are a minority, and indeed we were the vast majority, like in Malta before, but now we became a minority church. No, you can lament and be unhappy and say, we are the minority. The question is, when you are a minority, where the majorities are? Where are the majorities? That is an interesting question. Now, for our church, there are 3 majorities I would like to mention, and the first word before, in my diocese is a double reality. There is the city of Antwerp, and there is the rest of the province, the diocese. The city of Antwerp is a cosmopolitan city, like Brussels. People from everywhere, from all nations, from all cultures, from all religions. A mixture of everything. The province is more or less a Belgian reality, Flemish reality, with people from abroad, but in smaller minorities. Antwerp is just a mixture. Now, where are the majorities we have to face? First majority, the Catholics living in the periphery of the church. Sometimes I say that, well, let me say, Jesus in the gospel often he speaks of the lost sheep of Israel. Yeah. And in his opinion, Israel had more lost sheep than sheep. The same is true for my church. I have more lost Catholics, so to speak, than Catholics coming to church. The majority is not attending. The majority of baptized and confirmed Catholics I do not see in church. My country once belonged to the most committed and generous Catholic regions of the world. One can hardly imagine something Catholic that did not exist and flourish in Belgium. However, as a result of many social, cultural and religious developments, that reality has gone. Only an extremely low percentage of baptized Catholics frequently takes part in a Sunday celebration. Parishes struggle to find new co-workers, to approach young families, or to integrate young people. When asked about their relation with the church, many refer to a feeling of estrangement towards the language and the whole setup of the church. Others refer to some discriminations or iniquities they experienced or they say they have experienced in the church. And others refer to their personal or family life that is not in accordance with Catholic doctrine or Catholic canon law, like divorced and remarried persons, young or adult persons living in a stable relationship or even in a civil marriage without a sacramental blessing, and that. On the other hand, many people joining the church again or willing to work for the church do live in what canon law considers as irregular situations. Among our best catechists, teachers of religion, visitors of the sick and pastoral workers, many are living in such an canonically irregular situation. There is great truth in the words of Jesus that sinners are often more disposed to join him than the just. Hence, a first challenge: how to be a welcoming church for the lost sheep of my own flock. How to be a welcoming church for all those Catholics living in the peripheral areas of the church. How to connect again with our own diaspora Catholics. That's a first majority. A second majority then, and I think of the city of Antwerp, the agglomeration now. Christians coming from other continents and countries. In the last decades, large numbers of Christians coming from all continents and countries arrived in our major cities and agglomerations. Many of these Christians are Catholics, like Polish Catholics, African Catholics, Catholics from India or Pakistan. Many are Catholics. Others belong to different Orthodox churches, Romania, for example, Ukraine, Protestant, and particularly evangelical traditions, small evangelical groups from all over the world. All these Christian newcomers together reshape Christianity into a majority of minorities. So Christianity is more present now in my city than it was 20 years ago, but it is a collection of minorities. So Christianity becoming again a majority, but a majority of minorities. In the agglomeration of Antwerp, the total number of Christians coming from other continents and countries largely exceeds the number of national Christians taking part in a Sunday celebration. So the total number of baptized Catholics from Belgium is still the biggest number, but if you would count the people who are in a Sunday Mass celebration on Saturday or Sunday, the total sum of the churchgoers, the majority will be of non-Belgian origin. In terms of confessing, celebrating faith, the newcomers obviously, evidently surpass the nationals, at least in our major cities or agglomerations. However, notwithstanding the fact that they bring young people, young families into the church, integrating them is not an easy undertaking. From both sides, prejudices and misconceptions on both sides, combined with the weight of history and a latent indifferentism, do not foster the kind of welcoming church we would like to be. I have to insist both on our Belgian Catholics to say, but please be open to them, welcome them, give them a tea or a coffee after Mass. It's not evident if you come from Africa or India to feel at home in a Flemish community. So be open. And to those coming from elsewhere, I have to say, but do it, go to that celebration. Do not stay only among your own connationals or those who speak your language, but go and integrate. You are a Catholic, and you not more and not less than all the other ones. But integration of Christians from abroad is not that easy. The fear of migration also plays with respect of the Christians among them. Yeah. That's a second majority. So all these Christian groups coming from abroad and being the majority of the celebrating, witnessing community. And then there is a third majority, believers adhering to other cultural and religious traditions. According to a recent research, more than half the population of the agglomeration of Antwerp, which counts about 500,000 citizens, the majority is of foreign origin. So 50%, more than 50% of the agglomeration is coming from other countries and continents. Now, in the younger generations, it is much more than 50%. The younger, the bigger the majority. So children in primary school, it is 2/3, 3/4 that are from foreign. So the younger, the bigger the majority. Young people in a secondary school or children in a primary school, also in our Catholic schools, are used to live and work in classes with a majority of peers from different immigrant origins. A large majority of children and youngsters do not speak our official language at home. As to their religious affiliation, the vast majority of them belongs to a Muslim community. So that is the fact that the large majority of all the young people in my city are Muslim children and young people, and an ever-increasing majority. Yeah. Among all religions present in our agglomeration, Islam holds the largest number of practicing communities because they are more committed than our own Catholics. No wonder, therefore, that also, and particularly in Antwerp, right-wing political parties, more nationalist, traditional parties, promoting anti-migration and anti-refugee policies are doing an excellent business. We had elections, as you had 2-3 weeks ago. Now, that wing is going up, it's clear. They clearly won the last elections of 2 weeks ago. Many citizens, including many Catholic, Jewish and Muslim voters, feel threatened in their safety and in their identity. It's the new word today, identity. They would prefer the doors of our country to be firmly closed for more newcomers. Now, the question, how to be a welcoming church and how to promote a welcoming attitude in such a social and political setting. It is not easy. Up till now, Catholic communities and institutions, schools, parishes, trade unions, have been among the main promoters of human rights, hospitality and integration, encouraged by the gospel message and also by the social teaching of the Catholic Church. They were among the main agents of an inclusive and an understanding society. Nowadays, however, many priests, pastoral co-workers and leaders of Catholic organizations, they feel puzzled. They feel puzzled after the last elections. It's hard for us to understand. Puzzled by recent developments that are so contrary to what they always thought and still think to be the right way for humanity in general and for Christianity in particular. So, how to be a welcoming church in a less welcoming society? That will be the question for us, and I guess also for you in the future. How to be a more welcoming church in a less welcoming society. Yeah. I am halfway, if you. So a listening and a welcoming church. Now I go for an accompanying church. An accompanying. As Jesus walked with the disciples of Għemmaws before entering their house and sitting at their table, accompanying. There is a road to be walked before you can sit together around the table, even around the table of the Eucharist. In Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis develops three principles you may have read, and one of the three, and another one I will mention later on, is time is greater than space. Time is greater than space. And the principle is about what he calls initiating processes rather than possessing spaces. It's more important to have an initiating, a gradual process than to possess a space. The Pope refers to this principle in a chapter that deals with the common good and peace in society. And let me quote him. The principle enables us to work slowly but surely, without being obsessed with immediate results. It's like in education. You need slowly but surely, without being obsessed with immediate results. It helps us patiently to endure difficult and adverse situations or inevitable changes in our plans. And how many times we do have to change our plans. It invites us to accept the tension between fullness and limitation. We would like fullness, but what we have is more limitations than fullness. The tension between fullness and limitation. And to give a priority to time. Giving priority to time means being concerned about initiating processes rather than possessing spaces. What we need then is to give priority to actions which generate new processes in society and engage other persons and groups who can develop them to the point where they bear fruit in significant historical events. But first you need processes. Now, where do I see a need of accompaniment in ongoing processes? A first group. I see and I meet quite a number of persons who are ready for a change in their life. In my country, young people, I mean 17, 18, 19, 20 years. Those who are not here in the assembly. Young people. There may be an exception, but in my country, young people find it difficult to make an early choice in life for Jesus or the church. It's difficult for them to make an early choice at age around 18, 20 years. At the end of secondary school, at around 18 or 20 years, hardly any young person nowadays chooses to become a priest or a religious, to study theology or religious sciences, or to engage in a sacramental marriage. It's the same line. At that age, they are not ready for that kind of a decision. Be it becoming a priest, a religious, to go to university for religious studies, and the same is true for a sacramental marriage. It is just too early for them to make such a choice. They are neither against nor in favor, but in their personal development they are not yet at the point of making such a decision. On the other hand, and now I come to my point, an increasing number of persons do make a new choice or a second choice for the church in a second period of their active life. Most students at our diocesan higher institute for religious studies or at the faculty of theology in Leuven are of that kind. They have different qualifications already, degrees. They worked for several years, and many of them already have a family. They got to know life, society, and the church with both their strengths and their weaknesses. They went through a period of spiritual maturation and personal reflection before deciding to change the order of priorities in their life. That's the point. Before changing the order of priorities in their lives. A teacher of history or mathematics opts to become a teacher of religion. He already was a teacher, but he says there are more than mathematics or French grammar in life. Let me a shift towards religion. A medical doctor or a nurse opts to become a pastoral assistant or work in a hospital. In my diocese, I have 3 or 4 medical doctors, women, who stopped being a doctor, went for studying theology, and became a pastoral worker in a hospital. An engineer opts to become a pastoral assistant in his parish. 55 years, he earned money enough for his family. Children are not depending on him anymore. And so he said, no, for the last 10 years of my active work, there are other things in life to live for than only a factory, business, and money. An educator opts to become a priest, so he was a social worker and he became a priest. Now, these people make me think of the 12 apostles in the Gospel. Jesus did not call seminarians of 18 years old. No. He asked people who were in their active life, fishermen with a family and not yet retired. And he asked them in a second moment to leave their boats and nets and to follow him more closely in a second period. Now, what does our church badly needs now? Qualified people to accompany such persons in their search for human and spiritual growth. People who can accompany them in reflecting on the priorities in their lives. People who can help them discern the will of God at that turning time, in that turning period of their lives. And that requires patience, wisdom, and courage. That's a first group for accompaniment. A second group for accompaniment, young families. Many couples find it difficult to celebrate a sacramental marriage at the beginning of their life as a couple or as a family. Let us say that nearly 100% of all couples, they start living together, and afterwards, after a couple of years, there is a civil marriage first, and then possibly a sacramental marriage. But there is a progress in that. They remain, for years often, they remain at a safe or gentle distance from the church without opting either against or in favor of the church. It's just an open question. They start living together and thinking of a family. Yeah. They never really abandoned the church, but never developed an active relation with the church neither. It's not that they abandoned, no, they didn't abandon, they were not actively committed neither. They follow what most of their friends are doing, postponing anything that relates to faith and to the church until a later date. Not before they feel settled suitably in life, settled in terms of professional life, housing, children, and social life, will they develop some new interest for the church or their local parish. I know a number of young families who discovered or rediscovered the church at the occasion, for example, of the first communion or the confirmation of one of their children. They were invited to some preparatory or catechetical meetings for the children and the parents and got interested in the meaning of that celebration both for their child and for themselves. Other couples were invited by a priest or a parish leader to take part in one or another activity close to their circle of interest, because you have to find the circle of interest, and that can be music, architecture, international solidarity, questions of peace and war, or a study group or a Bible group, and got ever more involved. Many of these couples are educated persons. Now, they have a degree. They are intelligent and eager to reflect on questions of Christian faith and life. Now, it is not enough for these people just to be welcomed in a friendly and nice atmosphere. They need more than that. So it's not enough to be very open and to have the best coffee. No, you need more than that. Their religious formation came to a halt towards the end of secondary school or during their higher education. And there is a large gap to bridge in their Christian understanding and spiritual life. Hence, another need in our church to find the need for people who have the charism and the competence to accompany couples and families in their growing process towards the gospel and towards the church. Not at an early stage, but some years later onwards. But you need qualified people. In most of these cases of these couples, I know the person who was their bridge builder. I know the priest or the deacon or a lay person who, for them, was the bridge builder between their family and the church. But they need a bridge builder. Someone who finds the point in their lives, in their family, that can be touched for bringing them, for waking up their interest and to connect again with the local community. But that's a question of accompaniment. They will not fall from heaven into the church. And the third area of accompaniment for me is the society as a whole. Society as a whole. What do I mean? A large and most important area of accompaniment has to do with the larger society in which we live and of which we are part. How can the church accompany our societies in their major changes and challenges? There was a time in Belgium, like in Malta, I think, the church was so important, so strong, so heavy, there was no need of accompaniment. We could decide anything. We didn't have to accompany. We were in the structures of decision making. But no, once you are not any longer in the structures of decision making, the question is how and who can accompany a society in its feelings and in its decisions. It's a different thing to be able to decide as to accompany. Now, where is the church in so many questions and developments that deeply affect the world of today? And as a bishop, I should first address these questions to myself and to my colleagues. Where are the bishops in accompanying our societies? Where are the bishops or leading Christians and Catholics in the major debates of our days? There are so many areas in which I miss hearing convincing voices of the church. And I give some examples. The destabilization at the moment of the European community. We had the elections, but there is something wrong. There is something that misses interest and energy and conviction in the European community. But did I say anything, or did I hear another bishop saying anything concerning Europe the months before the election? No. The Brexit. I know quite a number of bishops in Great Britain, both Catholic and Anglican. They say the same. Brexit happened, and at the time we could have said something, we didn't dare to speak, because we said, oh, it's a political question. It's for the politicians to speak up. Yeah, but no, they are where they are, and nobody is happy, particularly among the church leaders. But it's too late. The race of nationalistic and populist parties. So we are part of that area in Central Europe where right-wing parties and right-wing policies are going up, be it in England, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, in France, in Poland, in Hungary, in Austria. It's everywhere. Yeah. And that new search for identity. We have to defend our identity. But which identity would we like to defend? And whose identity? And is it only individual identities, or is it also a collective identity? But in that whole debate, how can we accompany our societies? The propagation of xenophobia and hatred of foreigners. It's very strong now in most countries of Europe. There are reasons to be afraid. That is not a question. And there are limits to everything, also to migration. There are limits and numbers. You have to be reasonable. But how to avoid it to become xenophobia or irrational or emotional hatred? That's different. The sharpening of national identities, and I can go on. The deficiency of international cooperation for resolving major problems such as the war in the Middle East, Syria. Now, what did we hear on Syria in the last half a year? Hardly anything. Hardly anything. The interest of the media shifted again a bit to Sudan and to Africa, but although the war is going on. But what do we as a church and we as bishops what do we do to accompany our societies in saying this is a major area of conflict? And the violence we had with extreme Muslim groups, it was coming from there. And unless the problem in the Middle East is resolved, the extreme groups will continue to flourish because they take their munition, ideological munition, from there. So, to conclude, fortunately, so how to accompany our societies on a large scale in these areas? And fortunately, here I add, in my opinion, nowadays we have the good example of Pope Francis. If we didn't have him in this time, who would speak for all these groups? So that was my third part, and I have a last one, if you still have energy. A church that goes forth, No, a church that goes forth. Let us be realistic. For the church to go forth cannot be but a long-term project. It's not only what do we have to do tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I mean, somehow the church and the churches in plural, particularly in the Western world, we will have to reinvent ourselves. It is obvious that Western society and Western culture has undergone and still does undergo changes reaching so deep that they do not allow for easy solutions or short-term remedies. The marginal position of Christianity and the Church nowadays resembles other periods of global turmoil, as it was the case, and I refer to 3 periods, after the fall of the Roman Empire and the loss of all Christian communities in the main Roman cities. Christianity in the West had to start again after the barbaric populations came in. I do not know very well the history of Malta, but I also, you think, had this part of these populations coming in. Then after the religious wars in the 16th century, that was particularly Central Europe, Germany, England, Belgium, Holland, France, the division of the church between Catholics and Protestant. Now that war destroyed everything, and we had to start from zero again, nearly, after the Council of Trent in the 16th century. And it took 2 centuries before the church already was completely there. And then another period after the French Revolution, particularly also in Central Europe, there was a ravage. It destroyed nearly our good friend Napoleon. He was here in Malta also. He tried to save a bit, but the church had to start again in the 1800s from bottom to top. Now, that happens also in our days, but without violence. That's the point. Basic paradigms have changed in such a way that the answers of old don't fit anymore. What basic paradigms that changed? The relation between faith and reason. Faith and reason. The relation between the individual and society, or the individual and community. It changed. Between the local and the universal. You cannot be only universal, you cannot be only local, but the whole discussion on the European community is on the relation between the local and the universal. The Trump history and the United States, it's the Brexit. It's related, the relation between local and universal. Between man and woman, that relation changed, also in the church. Between the body and the spirit, between humankind and nature, the whole green movement now, the new awareness, between the rich and the poor, between the sacred and the profane. All these paradigms have deeply changed, and starting again from Jesus Christ, it will take a long time for Christianity and for the church to find new and appropriate ways to proclaim the gospel message and to invent new models of Christian community life. Simple teachings, admonitions, or solutions can seduce some nostalgic spirits. And we have nostalgic spirits, it's clear, everywhere. But they do not generate new perspectives. On the contrary. So where should the church that goes forth move to? It's an open question. Go forth. But anyway, going forth will mean entering new landscapes, new horizons. A second area of going forth, going to the peripheries of human life, a point that is very dear to the heart of Pope Francis. Going not to the peripheries of Catholicity, but to the peripheries of human life. Since the very first day of his pontificate, Pope Francis was very clear. The church should go forth from inside to outside, from the center to the periphery. We have to be present where the light of Christ is the most absent. And now I quote him in Evangelii Gaudium. He says, each particular church, as a portion of the Catholic Church under the leadership of its bishop, is likewise called to missionary conversion. So not only missionary activity, but missionary conversion. Missionary activity can only start from a conversion towards mission first. Its joy in communicating Jesus Christ is expressed both by a concern to preach him to areas in greater need and in constantly going forth to the outskirts, the periphery of its own territory, or towards new socio-cultural settings. Wherever the need for the light and the life of the risen Christ is greatest, it will want to be there. To make this missionary impulse ever more focused, generous and fruitful, I encourage each particular church to undertake a resolute process of discernment, purification and reform. So for the church, the outskirts, the periphery of our own territory extend in all directions. There are the many baptized Catholics, as I said, who have lost any effective relation with the church. There are the many Christians living in difficult, irregular or unstable family relations. There are the poor and disadvantaged people living in ever larger numbers in the margin of our major cities. So Antwerp is a rich city, a flourishing rich city with an increasing number of poor people, and where, for example, poverty among the children is ever increasing, child poverty increasing. There are the migrants and refugees, millions of people wandering around the world in search of a safe homeland for themselves and for their children. There are the areas of conflict, terror and war, and there are all kinds of modern slavery, addiction and exhaustion. With none of these situations, a Christian can feel happy or at home. So all these peripheral areas, they are there. And this made me remind of a book that was written, you may have read it in your younger years like me, a French author, Gilbert Chesbron. He wrote a book in the 1950s, and the title is Les saints vont en enfer. The saints are going to the hell. The saints are going to the hell. Saints are not going to heaven, saints are going to hell. What does he mean? The saints here, it is a novel on priests, and they called it Les prêtres ouvriers, working priests, priests who decided not to be a parish priest, but to work in a factory among the poor. And these priests were coming in all these, living in the poor periphery of Paris, in the 1950s, and they discovered there all these dirty situations in which people were living. So the book is on these priests living among the poor and the outskirts of Paris, the dirty outskirts of Paris in the 1950s. But the title is fascinating. The saints, they are able to go there. Saints are not those who can protect themselves from anything that is dirty. No, they have the courage and the faith to go there where life is difficult, where life is like a hell. They go there. Voilà. Then a second area to go to reach out, to go to our own people and culture. It's a bit theological, but important. The universal dimension of the Catholic Church can be called both her strength and her weakness. It is the strength of the Catholic Church, since only together and in full communion with one another and the Bishop of Rome can Catholics and Christians give a credible witness to the person and the saving work of Jesus Christ. We believe that Jesus, he lived and he died so that all may be one. All, in all continents, in all cultures. But on the other hand, this same principle of universality can also be used in a way that paralyzes the church in fulfilling her mission. Every local church has to accomplish its own mission in its own country and in its own culture. There are things that nobody else can do in our place than we ourselves. It has to find appropriate answers for the many particular questions it has to face. Again, in Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis develops the issue at length. In every part of the world, Christian faith and local culture should find each other in what he calls a new synthesis. In each culture, a new synthesis between faith and culture. I do not read the text. I give an example. I have good friends who are bishops, for example, in the center of Africa. On different opinions, we have on different issues, we have different opinions. It's clear, like how to evangelize, what about family issues, how to celebrate liturgy. But I do not have to be a good bishop in Africa, and he does not have to be a good bishop in Belgium. Each of us has to find appropriate ways for dealing with his own people. My credibility cannot come from a good example of a bishop in Africa. And his credibility in Rwanda cannot come from a good bishop in Belgium. Each of us has to gain its credibility through finding a good synthesis, not a compromise, but a new synthesis. Because often it is, but you compromise. No, it is a synthesis between faith and local culture. And there are differences, but differences that are sane and that belong to the nature of the church. And so for a local church to go forth means that it does not stop working in its own region, in an adult and responsible way for a new synthesis between faith and particular cultures. The credibility of the church cannot rely only on general teachings, general practices that fit always and everywhere. Waiting for developments or decisions that fit everywhere and for everybody in the whole Catholic Church is a most sure way for the Church not to go forth at all. Only with a good sense of realism and differentiation can faith and particular cultures meet each other again. It would be, okay, that's my point. Give credibility to this new synthesis and differentiation in that. And the last point in going forth is to create an openness for new relations in present-day society among Christians. In the first centuries, Christianity was an urban reality. So, in the Roman period, 3-4 centuries, Christianity was present only in the Roman cities, not on the countryside. In every city there was a bishop, and around the bishop some priests, some deacons, some clergy, and the faithful. It was a city, and the bishop, he was, like a city priest for his faithful. Christian communities lived and developed around their bishop in the main cities of the Roman Empire. Later on, after the invasion of Western Europe by so-called barbaric populations, the Vandals and the Visigoths and the Franks and the Germans and whatsoever, and the fall of the Roman Empire, missionary work had to start anew, this time on the countryside. The church became a rural reality, more than a city-urban reality. For each and every rural community, a parish was created. From the Middle Ages onwards, village life, parish life, family life, and Christian life nearly became synonymous. From the Middle Ages, until my parents, who were born in the 1930s. I think my parents, before they married, they never went further than their village. The village, the parish, the family, it was all synonymous. My father, he married a girl of the parish just besides their parish. So that was the village, the family, the parish. It just was like they covered one another. And it was a strong model. It functioned, and it functioned well. However, since the second half of the 20th century, village life and parish life gradually lost their cohesion and organizing power. In some parts of Europe, like my diocese, rural parishes have become extremely weak and fragile realities. Nowadays, most parishes are unable to assure their future on their own. What is more, they also lost their missionary and evangelizing capacity. They do take care of what remains of a once flourishing parish, but feel helpless in reaching out to new people or in creating new relationships. They find it most difficult and annoying to go and worship in a neighboring parish on Sunday. So we have to bring parishes together. When we ask people, please gather in the other church, that is in Belgium only 2-3 kilometers further, like in Malta, not even. We are not living in the United States or in the central France, where the next parish is 10 kilometers. No, it's only 2-3 kilometers. Very hard. Once we said, even if I would send a taxi and pay the taxi, they would refuse to enter the taxi. Because going to another church, it's like ecclesial adultery. It's like a kind of an ecclesial adultery. Yeah. Stay out, don't move. Yeah. And then they say, yes, but all the old ladies of over 80, if they do not have a local mass, but I say, you know, all these elderly ladies, take 1 or 2 in your car and bring them to the other church. Oh no, but she doesn't like it. Yeah, but yeah. So it's difficult to bring, to somehow make the difference again in our society between belonging to that village and being a Catholic. And I'm sure there is no future for our church, I'm speaking for my country, until people again make a distinction between belonging to that village and committed to that village and being a Catholic. And attending a Eucharist not because these people belong to my village or to my family or they are relatives, but because they are brothers and sisters in Christian faith, because they also belong to the church which is mine. So I go to church not to meet the other village members, but to meet other brothers and sisters in Christ. And that is what we will need. So new networking, a new way of bringing families together. So in one parish there are 2 families that have an interest in coming together, and 2 in that parish, and 2. Let them, they come together and network in a new way. And the buildings are there. That is not a problem. The churches are there. But let them come together in a new way of networking and connecting, in a way that does not coincide anymore with the village and the old parish structure that stems from the Middle Ages. But social life nowadays is not organized at a village scale anymore. So people, they have their supermarket is in that, my mother even, her supermarket is in that village, her haircutter in another village, the bank in another village, and still her coffee has to come from another supermarket in another village. So even elderly people, they live in a bigger region than a single village. So, but for the church to follow that is not easy. Now I come to my conclusion. The day before yesterday we celebrated Pentecost, and the weeks between Easter and Pentecost, every morning there is a reading in the Eucharist coming from the Acts of the Apostles. The Acts of the Apostles. The last phrases of the Acts of the Apostles, they were read the day before Pentecost, Saturday morning. The very last line, which is on St. Paul. And I would like to end with that verse from the Acts. He, Paul, lived there in Rome for 2 whole years at his own expense and welcomed all who came to him, proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching about the Lord Jesus Christ. He was in prison, but even in prison there were 3 things he could do. He could receive people, he could proclaim the kingdom of God, and teach about the Lord Jesus Christ. And these now are the last words, the very last words of the Acts of the Apostles, with all boldness and without hindrance. With boldness and without hindrance. So I think that the words of the Acts of the Apostles, they are an open mission for all of us today and for the church of today, to proclaim the kingdom of God, to teach about the Lord Jesus Christ, but to do it with all boldness and without hindrance. Thank you for your